Review, UPR, is a unique process which involves a review of the human rights records of all UN member states. Now, the UPR is a state-driven process under the auspices of the Human Rights Council, which provides the opportunity for each state to declare what actions they have taken to improve human rights situations in their countries and to fulfill their human rights obligations. Now, Uganda, as a member state of the UN, actively participated in 3 UPR cycles, starting with 2016. In January 2022, Uganda presented its national report under the 3rd cycle to the Human Rights Council Working Group during the 40th session in Geneva and had the outcome report adopted in July 2022. Uganda received a total of 270 recommendations and supported 138 of these and took note of 132 recommendations. Now, the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, Uganda, as the lead coordinator of the Civil Society Organization and Universal Periodic Review Consortium in Uganda, with the support from DGF, is stimulating a conversation today on the UPR process to create awareness. To intently analyze our topic, the role of the Universal Periodic Review mechanism in advancing women's rights and gender equality, I have Sharon Nakanwaji, who's the program manager with the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, Uganda. We're also joined by Mr. Mujuni Bernard, Commissioner for the Equity and Rights under the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, as well as Susan Ochen, Program Coordinator of Women's Rights and Access to Justice from Uganda Women's Network. This program is powered by the National Coalition of the Human Rights Defenders, Uganda, UPR 22, with support from the Irish Embassy and Uganda Women's Network. On NTV Uganda via Twitter, Facebook, as well as YouTube, where we are streaming live. The hashtag is UGUPR2023. I am Priscilla Regina Naroga, and once again, you're most welcome to this program. Our conversational topic this morning is looking at the role of the UPR mechanism in advancing women's rights and gender equality. I am joined by representation from the Uganda Women's Network. I also do have representation from the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, as well as representation from the Human Rights Defenders, Uganda. That's the national coalition, for which I'll start introductions with Madame Sharon Nakanwaji. You are most welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, viewers. My name is Sharon, and I'm the Program Manager for the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, Uganda.
Okay, next to her, we do have Mr. Mujuni Bernard from the ministry.
All right, good morning, viewers. Bernard Mujuni. I work with the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development as Commissioner for Equity and Rights. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
All right, and then next to him, we do have Ms. Susan Ochen. You're most welcome.
Thank you very much. Yes. Good morning, viewers. My name is Susan Ochen. I work with Uganda Women's Network, where I'm the Program Coordinator for Women's Rights and Access to Justice.
All right. Now, diving into it, of course, we are in the month of March, where we've been celebrating the International Women's Day. And the importance of the international human rights mechanisms such as the UPR are used in addressing women's rights as well as gender equality in regards to how women are perceived, viewed, and how they get to enjoy their rights. There's so many questions. What are the current human rights that are being respected as far as women are concerned in Uganda? And what are those rights that are still infringed upon in the year 2023? But to understand why the adoption of the UPR mechanism, let me turn to Sharon in understanding better the Universal Periodic Review. What is it, and how important is it in addressing women's rights and gender equality for us here in Uganda?
Yes, so the Universal Periodic Review is a process under the Human Rights Council. It's a unique process in such a way that it involves the review of the human rights records of member states of the UN. And this review is not that it is enforced or by law like the treaty bodies that we sign into, but it's a process whereby it's a peer review process. Member states give recommendations to different other states regarding their human rights situations. And it's these member states to accept whether to take on these recommendations and work on them it's up to them. But once they have accepted to do something about them, then they have to give feedback. And it's a phased process. They have to give feedback regarding what they have done on these recommendations that they have accepted to take on as governments. So that's what the UPR process is all about. They present a report, the state presents a report that they do present in Geneva regarding the recommendations that they have worked on, that were given and passed on to them, that they accepted. And so this report gives feedback on according to what they have done on the recommendations that were given unto them. So how is this UPR process we supporting or helping in terms of gender equality and gender promoting rights of women? So we know that in every member state there are issues to deal with women are varied. There are issues related with health, there are issues to do with education, women's rights. You know, all women, we're entitled to a right to education, rights to peaceful coexistence, right to access to justice, right to health. So through this UPR process, once a certain recommendation is handed over to a member state, for example, one of our states can recommend that Uganda should look into an issue of promoting access to education for all. That's now an opportunity. Once the state, the Ugandan government accepts to take on that recommendation and do something about it, that's an opportunity to promote that right to education, the right to health, the elimination of gender-based violence. So then it gives an opportunity to the state to budget further, finance such, because this recommendation has come from someone else, from a member state. So in a way it promotes gender equality, because once this is taken on, once the recommendation is taken on, the different entities, let's say Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, will pick on what it can do under that recommendation. Maybe Ministry of Education, if it's issues to do with girl child education and whatsoever, will take on that and work on it. So after a certain period of time, as a report is presented, is compiled by the state, which is presented at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, showing what Uganda has done regarding that recommendation which was given. So it presents an opportunity for gender equality and promoting women's rights, because then the state will emphasize that and make sure they commit to what they accepted to do.
Speaking of the state, we do have the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, Mr. Mujuni Bennett. In regards to what we're talking about this morning, when you talk about gender, women's rights and gender equality, as far as the government is concerned, and this I know falls under your docket, what's the progress of government in advancing women's rights as well as gender equality, and what major challenges have you faced in doing that so far?
Well, Priscilla, thank you so much for this opportunity to share with viewers on the roadmap to gender equality. Just to say that I can't easily summarize all this, but I'll make an attempt to highlight a few things which we all know or see. One is, for you to take particular stock, you must look at 3 levels. One, legal or regulatory framework, a policy framework, and programming framework. Now, legally speaking, in terms of legal framework, you know the Constitution, how it takes care of affirmative action, and then tenant, legislations like the Equal Opportunities Commission Act, the Gender-Based Violence Act, so many, the FGM Act, and Female Genital Mutilation Act, there are so many regulations. So the legal framework is okay. Of course, the courts have been very liberal in interpreting some of the provisions guaranteeing gender equality, and these have formed a very good precedent for justiciability of women's right to equality. Okay. But also in terms of policy and programming, you have the national gender policy, you have the equal opportunities policy, all these other policies, the child policy, the people with disability policy, and as such, we have committed even beyond. Uganda is at a different level in terms of being a regional hub, center of excellence on gender equality. In terms of programming, of course, you have the, programs like Women Entrepreneurship, programs, Uganda WEP, youth livelihood programs, Now with PDM, a lot of money has been ring-fenced for gender equality for women, and currently, and I'm sure if you were very attentive, all of us were, on Women's Day, His Excellency the President launched almost $1 trillion fund, 850 billion Uganda shillings, grow fund for women in small and medium enterprises. What a setup. I think of course, the government has been at the center of this with the leadership of His Excellency the President as the champion, for gender equality, not only in this country, but in the region and world over. And we've been showcased at UN levels. Currently, as I speak, the political leadership of the ministry is in New York on the committee on the status of women, and we've been showcasing all these achievements. As a result, all our neighbors have benchmarked with us, and they go and, of course, implement, not better than us, We make laws, we make regulations, they come and pick. Yes, that's our role. His Excellency the President is a Pan-Africanist, so if a policy, if Southern Sudan can pick our policy and go and implement, what's wrong with that? Export the policy. If Rwanda comes and picks some law and perfects it, yes, let's say, we've been benchmarking even up to West Africa, up to Liberia and Somalia, of course. So the region has been a center of excellence on gender equality. We appreciate that. That's why our commitment at UPR level is just, we've been brutally honest, and we've been praised by the UN that, Uganda is opening up so much to some of these. Will you achieve them? Yes, for us it's business as usual. So we appreciate all these.
Okay, while it's business as usual, I think we can give clap to the president for that fund that he has put aside, 850 billion. That's a lot of money for economic empowerment. Politically, he has also really shown the fronting of women's rights and backing up on gender equality. When you look at the women's rights that have been achieved in that regard, 34.9 seats in parliament that are being held by women currently. And
very strong ones, by the way.
Very strong
very
ones.
Critical
do
ministries.
Agree. But on the downside, you do have work that still needs to be done. We can't negate that fact in terms of gender equality. Looking at the statistics, about 75% of legal frameworks that promote, enforce and monitor gender equality under the SDG indicator with a focus on violence against women are in place. And then you do have 34% of women aged between 20 and 24 years of age that are married or were married under the age of 18 years of age. We've been seeing so many stories, the Minister Mutuzo piece dealing with such cases. Adolescent birth rate has skyrocketed courtesy of COVID-19, the pandemic, where you do have about 111 women per 1,000 aged between 15 and 19, and that this is as of 2017, down from the 131 per every 1,000 women back in 2015, and these figures are uglier today as we speak, and so on and so forth. The sexual violence that has been escalating left, right and center, and how policymakers as well as those that should be keeping law and order respond to such cases. This is where I would like to bring in the Uganda Women's Network in a review of gender equality and women's rights here in Uganda. With your assessment, Mr. Chen, where do you think we stand as a country in promoting these particular two cases, as well as the role that the Uganda Women's Network has played?
Thank you very much. As Bernard has very rightly said, Uganda has a rich legal regime, legal and policy regime to address women's rights. But the challenges remain with the enforcement. The challenges remain with the resourcing of the government machinery that is expected to fulfill that mandate. The challenges also remain largely with the society's understanding of women's rights, the society's appreciation of women's rights, the society's tolerance. As a society, we have a very low tolerance, a very high tolerance for violation of women's rights. There are actions that are done to women, and we are all very comfortable with it. if you remember the 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, the spike in teenage pregnancies, the spike in defilement cases, it is something that as a community we are not really bothered about. So one of the challenges that we have in promoting women's rights, in as much as we have these enabling frameworks, is that as a community we do not make steps to prevent violence against women and girls. We do not protect. Many a time we actually perpetrate, we condone, we connive with perpetrators. And then there are all these other structural challenges that the country is facing. So it worsens the situation. In as much as we have government's very good will to protect women's rights and advance gender equality, we are also facing right now a rollback on the advancement of women's rights. If you can just look at the last decade or so, progress in trying to enact gender-responsive legislation, in trying to enact laws that strengthen women's rights, the fight is much harder. The fight is much harder. I will give you an example of the Marriage and Divorce Bill, a proposal for reform of the marriage laws of the country, which has been on the floors of Parliament for decades. I think we are coming on 6 decades now. It has only changed in name, it has changed in letter. But even where there are very progressive proposals which are going to strengthen protections to women in marriage, there is almost a resistance. Those of us who are trying to push this message, you meet a brick wall, and sometimes it's over fears. Oh, this is an attempt to grab property, you are shaking the patriarchy, you know?
Yeah.
That is just one example. A couple of years ago, the Parliament of Uganda passed the Sexual Offences Bill. If you listen to the debate the day that bill was passed, you would weep for this country. Sexual offences are not matters to be trivialized, but the debate was flippant. You know, there was a legislator that compared the act of rape to a plane flight, and the Parliament laughed. The members in the House laughed. You do not joke around with sexual offences, you know. And the bill was passed without a major provision for consent. The basis of a sexual act is consent. If we are talking about a sexual act being offensive, being criminal, then the removal of consent from a law is as good as useless, you know. But that is pushback, that is rollback, you know. Right now on the floor of the Parliament, there is a bill being debated before the Committee on Health, or it's called the Assisted Reproductive Bill. It is intended to deal with, to support persons that are struggling with fertility, to have children. And apparently there's a clause in that bill against unmarried people accessing treatments if that bill is passed into law. Just look at the country as we are. Who is it that will mostly suffer in a situation where a couple cannot have children? It is the woman that suffers.
The stigma goes
the
to
stigma,
the women,
you know,
societal, you know, separating them.
You've said
because
it.
of what has
You've
happened
said
to
it
them
rightly.
in their bodies,
Yes.
and how they receive it.
Yes.
It's very disturbing.
It's very disturbing. But if that is the direction that our leaders who make decisions for this country are taking, you weep for this country. So in as much as we've made progress, there is a current rollback, a pushback on advocacy, on efforts to promote women's rights. Now, one of the things that as Uganda Women's Network we are doing through the UPR is coordinating reporting. As Sharon explained, in as much as the government produces a report, civil society also provides an alternative opinion. And UWONET is honored to convene the Women's Rights Cluster. In the third cycle of reporting, we convened the women's rights cluster, gathering reports under the different articles of the UPR, reports which we then condensed into a women's cluster report, and this was submitted to the working group. It was submitted to the working group, and recommendations were given. Reporting is very important. It's very important because then you're able to measure the actions that you're taking. You're able to track your progress. Are you improving against the targets that had been set? It is important to report, and it is something that we take very seriously. The other action that we take to promote women's rights is feedback mechanisms. You know, these international instruments, sometimes they're not very well known amongst duty bearers, amongst rights holders, people who are expected actually to know that this is an instrument that I can use in the implementation of my work. If I am planning, for example, an access to justice project, or if I'm planning a health intervention, I can go and look into the UPR and see what was advised for the country. So one of the things that we do is feedback, is provide feedback to different stakeholders, the ministries, departments, and agencies of government. We provide feedback to parliamentary committees. We provide feedback to civil society organizations as well, because we are direct implementers.
Speaking of feedback that has previously come through, and I'll turn to Sharon, the engagement between the civil society organization and such a mechanism, because it's not really a compulsory mechanism per se, but it's one that is adopted on the moral basis of having as much accountability to some of those elements that matter as member states to the UN. And so with those interactions, in your regards, could you share with us how this process has helped to do checks and balances?
So what happens, first of all, as the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders Uganda, we coordinate the whole UPR process for CSOs in Uganda. So we bring together CSOs to also compile their shadow report, like Susan has explained, because the state makes its own report, then we also provide a shadow report of how we see the situation regarding the different recommendations that were made. So there are several CSOs that are brought into this entity, but in the whole process, it's not just a one-off. In the whole process of their work, they should be monitoring, like what she has said, monitoring what has been happening in this issue. If we are talking about education of the girl child, what is it that has been happening? If we are talking about health-related issues, gender-based violence, they have been documenting all these processes, so they are able to compile whatever they have documented to justify then as the shadow report, wherever it is, to the Human Rights Council, so that then other interventions now are proposed. So it's a check, a balance. We are also checking what the government is doing, but in a way, as CSOs, we are also like helping to lift the burden, because CSOs also implement this work that is meant to be. We cannot leave the whole burden to the state, the constraints financially, and so many other things. So we are checking what is happening. It's a check and balance, but we are coming together to report. We are not only doing and doing and doing, because if you don't check what you're doing, then you may be off guard. So through that, through providing this information, through bringing the different CSOs together, because sometimes you can speak here in Uganda and your voice may not be heard. But when you amplify it up to international levels, where other states are free to say, this is, I mean, here it's like an equal basis, the UPR. It's not that the United States is way above you, no. As Uganda, you're free to tell the United States, this is what I need you to check into your human rights related issue, and you need to do this. So it's taken on, it's a peer review process. I tell you, as my peer, do this about this. Yeah. So as the National Coalition, we've been able to bring together over 200 CSOs, and the report we submitted was in July 2021, and following that report, recommendations were handed down. So there are current recommendations that now the government has accepted, that are being worked on that we are
Speaking
still
of
monitoring.
recommendations, looking at what other member states have recommended in terms of women and women's rights and gender equality. Looking at one here from Togo, you do have them recommending taking measures to give priority to the allocation of financial resources to programs to combat gender-based violence, as well as to increase national budget allocations and investments for early childhood development, which was accepted. Another accepted one was recommended by South Africa: enhance measures to prevent discrimination against all vulnerable groups, including women, children, and persons living with HIV. Then you get to have one that caught my attention, and that is Dominican Republic implementing additional measures to address violence against women and domestic violence, making available mechanisms for protection, access to justice, and effective reparation for victims of violence against women as well as domestic violence. Another one that was accepted. Mr. Chen, could you talk to us more and throw more light on these specific recommendations, the ones that are geared to Uganda and more so accepted to be implemented in one way or another?
We are glad, in the women's movement, we are glad when government accepts such recommendations, because government also has the opportunity, they reserve the right to say we do not think that that recommendation is warranted based on our past performance. So we are glad that government accepts the recommendations, because it's an indicator that government is going to take action. That action, as has already been referred to, is reliant on resources. It's reliant on resources. However, we are in a situation where there's an apparent, I use that word very, very, very carefully. There seems to be an apparent limited or small resource envelope for matters that are related to women's rights, which is troubling, If I may speak about our mother ministry, the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development.
I'm not going to say that it is underfunded.
Bernard, that is what I am going to say.
No.
It is not underfunded.
Let her make her defense.
Yes.
Then you let us, with assurance and evidence,
because
in regards
we are here
to if there is enough money to cover what
and don't look at the ministry
sorted
alone.
out. Yeah.
Okay?
Indeed.
Look at the entire government, how it is resourced.
Mr. Chen,
Yes.
please continue.
Yes, the Ministry of Gender is doing great work. I always like to refer to the rural districts, because that is where you see the reality of how the development agenda affects the common man and the common woman. The Ministry of Gender is doing great work, especially in the, in our districts down there. But the Ministry of Gender can do a lot more if they had more. That is a question of resourcing. It's a question about where we put our monies. If I may speak about the police, the work that is required to provide protection. Protection is not just that there is a security personnel standing there. It's about creating awareness. It's about making people, creating the consciousness of the society to be intolerant to certain practices. It's about having the resources to go and investigate. It's about having the resources to link up with other justice, law and order sector actors. Now, for cases of GBV, sometimes you feel that not as much is being done.
Okay.
And GBV predominantly affects women and girls, That is an area that, as a country, I think the resourcing, is an area that, as a country, a lot more needs to be done.
Well, the ministry is well represented here, Mr. Mujuni, in terms of resource, and again, picking up from the recommendations, implementing additional measures or funding to address violence against women and domestic violence. Now, of course, you do have a budget, and that budget in one way or another is honored. However, the element that where the ministry is right now in 2023 ought not to be the place of administering the issues that are best with gender equality.
Priscilla,
in Uganda. in present day time. So at the end of the day, I guess the better question would be, how is government then going to work with the opportunity of the civil society presently to actually mitigate these issues presented and also the recommendations given?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I've been boiling. First of all, I think I'm lucky I was born with one tooth, and that I've been part of the UPR delegation, and but I'm also part of the recommendations, implementing the recommendations. And so I participate in the compilation of state party reports, of the reports. So, but much more importantly is that we need to be more broad in the way we approach some of these issues. First of all the civil society organizations, these people's budgets are all in the social development sector. So you cannot say limited resources when you are busy implementing, unless if you are saying that you don't have programs running. So the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development sector is as broad as almost all 99% of the NGOs' budgets are concerned in this country. So what we need to do is account for your resources on how you are impacting on communities at local government level, because a lot of money goes down into communities which you are programming. But local governments don't take stock of this, they don't know. So what we are saying is that there are a lot of resources which are going down communities but uncoordinated. And that is very, very important. Two, we have already
uncoordinated with government.
Yeah, with the civil society organization. Because once you want to reach out and to know how much is being resourced to the communities, then you're interfering, then you are controlling. Then that one is a different level of debate. But what we are saying, if you have program activities or programming on gender-based violence, go and share the budgets with local government so they know that, oh, this much money is coming into communities. And therefore we capture it at national level. Because then you will only look at what the ministry gets, yet will work as a sector. Isn't it? So now that is one. Two, look at what the private sector and other ministries or other agencies are doing. A lot of money goes into early childhood, nutrition, education, access to justice by different sectors. You've got to take stock of all this. But much more importantly is that I've just been highlighting on how much the government is putting back. You see, empowerment is a 360 degrees. You can't just talk about gender-based violence and how people quarreled and fought without saying, okay, economic empowerment is part of the matrix. It must be a whole value chain of empowerment. Once women get access to capital, both economic, social, and then the rest will roll out. They'll be empowered to access justice. Yes, yesterday, a certain lady, a teacher, right from Shema, came to my office. The husband, who is a border rider, and this is a professional teacher, wanted 3 children who are minors from her. And the border went to, chambers, and they went to the magistrate, and she was being frustrated. She finally had to come to the ministry, help me. I had to call my friends from FIDA to make sure they intervene. So to me, I think beyond just access to justice, you've got to look at the entire economic package for that can help gender equality to move forward, and that's the fund which the government has rolled out. Once women are economically empowered, the rest becomes history.
Okay. Turning to Sharon, what do you make of government's request to be as open to, the programs that you're running, the funding that you're getting to run those programs so that it can better aid both the government and civil society in serving the issue at hand as a whole?
Yeah, it is okay because we are partners. And actually, it's happening, Bernard, though maybe not with everyone. At least I know entities I have been part of where at the sub-county level and district level, you go to the meetings, you submit your budgets, but we do sign MOUs with districts and we let them know the work that we are doing. It may not be happening with every other CSO, I will acknowledge, but it is something we need to take stock of and do. But I think what Susan was leading to was that by the time this recommendation was made, that increased resourcing to this gender department or ministry, I think there are several requirements that need to be done, the gender policy and its implementation and rollout, many other entities that would need more resourcing instead of focusing these resources on some other issues that may look to be major. Yes, I appreciate the President has given all that other funds, but we also cognizant of the fact that there are funds which go into other items that maybe it would be more important to resource this other department to implement certain other things. I'll give you an example. Yes, we may have the law, and that's why I was explaining in the beginning that there are different institutions that implement these issues of gender-based violence. A woman will go to the police station to report a rape case. But the person who's supposed to, the police officer who's supposed to go and arrest the perpetrator will tell you, I don't have fuel. So this same woman is the one supposed to provide the fuel.
The victim.
The survivor. Then, following that, maybe you have hustled and gone through all that and brought your case up to court. And then in court they will tell you, look, we have a list of cases that we are handling. So
your case will be fast heard in 3 months' time.
So you even lose,
evidence is gone.
If everything is not well handled there, something may happen along the way. And maybe someone will say, okay, let's increase, I'll not say that's the solution, let's increase the judges or the magistrates or whoever. But I think by the time they made this recommendation of increased resourcing, they realized there are certain gaps along the path of justice, along the, you know, that's why this UPR process includes different entities. Even when this recommendation is handed down,
it maybe directly falls under Ministry
of Gender, but then there is Ministry of Internal Affairs. So I would accept what Bernard says, yes, we are all partners in this, because we will even provide information of what is actually happening on ground.
Because I know that also the judiciary is pushing for budget increment just to sort out that very issue you're talking about. Yeah.
So maybe there are those who may not be declaring their actual resources, and they may have certain reasons. It is right that we should all come together as partners and declare our resources, so that even when maybe the government is making its report to Geneva saying, yes, we increased resourcing, but of course mainly I think that would be the direct resourcing that the government is allocating in terms of its budgeting.
Now, speaking of partnerships, turning to you, Chen, in regards to partnerships, how best can partnerships be made with government, especially in light of the recommendations that we have presently, as well as promoting women's rights and gender equality using the Universal Periodic Review mechanism?
As civil society, we have no option but to foster very good relations with government. And I want to believe that many civil society organizations actually work very well with their direct ministries or agencies, whichever sector they are in. One of the things that can be done, for example, is through these treaty obligations. When we get this kind of information, we also have, like I said earlier, we have an opinion that we can share with government, the different government ministries, and that is one of the things that we do. Because many times when these processes are completed, we do not go back and revisit what it is saying and take stock and take action during the next 4.5 years. One of the things that can be done is strengthening the partnerships on understanding what are the recommendations and what can be done, you know? And also at a very practical level in the districts that we all work in, where are the opportunities for us to link up with different government departments to try and implement some of these recommendations. We do that also with civil society, you know? We do that also with civil society to continue having feedback mechanisms to keep track of actions being taken on the recommendations. It's a bit difficult to wait for the 4.5 years of the cycle without tracking what you're doing, without documenting, because then you're going to lose track of that. Yeah, so the partnerships are available within the government. They're also available within civil society.
Okay. Mr. Mujoli, now, of course, all this is around International Women's Day, and I know the UN theme was Dig It All.
Yes.
In regards to the celebrations we had in Chihura, the commitment of the President, much as it was a good commitment, what I realized with the women in Chihura, they have no interaction interaction whatsoever with ICT in one way or another. That may not be realized in the year 2023. So could you help us understand how government is going to be able to adapt and implement this year's theme in promoting ICT and innovations, focusing on the girl child and the woman?
Well, thank you so much. We all know that the right to access to information and also access to internet is very, very fundamental right. And we saw that during COVID, because without access to information and technology and internet, you couldn't access food and livelihood. And so it's a basis, a new emerging basis of discrimination and exclusion. And as a ministry which deals with vulnerabilities, this is very, very important because it's also a social protection issue. That's why we accepted the recommendation also and rolled out the implementation of a National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, which the ministry, my ministry, with our leadership and guidance from the cabinet, rolled out. And now we are implementing. Now, the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights prioritizes access to technology and information for women. And it even expounds beyond the usual, the civil or the fourth estate, which is civil society, you know. It's a very big sector now, to businesses, you know. And as such, you see, in Kiruhura, as you stated, we are building a STEM academy. And this is going to be a life-changing academy, especially accessing digital skills for women.
Okay.
Women, to make sure that they are very functional. These soft skills are very important for you to access opportunities and even compete and even access markets globally. Someone who is doing ghee in Chiruhura can decide to sell it in Nairobi by just using the digital skills on the phone and access markets globally. So for us, we think it's a very, very important opportunity, but also it provides opportunities for creating enterprises.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, enterprises and growing entrepreneurs. That's why it is blended with a growth and, you know, accessing opportunities for entrepreneurs who are largely women-led enterprises.
We are waiting to see the realities of this theme 2023. I'm going to give Sharon the closing remarks in regards to this conversation, how best we can actually concurrently and as well as supportively make sure that women's rights are protected continuously, as well as gender equality.
Yeah, thank you. I think each and every one of us should play our role. We have an opportunity to reach out to support these mechanisms that have been put in place. The different legal entities that are in place, we have a role to play, whether we are men or we are women. As a man, whether you're Bernard, you have a wife, you have a daughter, to protect. So for us, as we are using the UPR mechanism to say that beyond speaking to the Parliament of Uganda, beyond speaking to our judicial system, we can escalate this to another level where someone else at the international level could also hear it out and guide us on what to do. So I call upon the different entities, the different CSOs, the people who are doing very good work out there, but the work may not be known, or you have findings, you have documented, you have advocated on so many issues, but when it comes to providing the actual evidence, it is left somewhere there. So we call upon you to come and be part of this journey. Come and join us, come and be part. Make use of the UPR, the Universal Periodic Review. Go beyond the national, go beyond the African level, the African Commission. Let's escalate it to the international level, but let's document well, let's report well, let's come together, let's not work in silos, let's come together and present our issues, but also, like Bernard says, put our resources together to make changes to our country. So let's embrace the Universal Periodic Review. Let's be interested in these processes that are taking place and contribute to these mechanisms, because I believe the state pays attention, and so let's seize the opportunities where the state pays attention and make a contribution to them. Even the media, all of us are in this together.
All right, we're in this together. Thank you so much, Sharon Nakano, Jade National Coalition. Yes.
Take on their roles, and stand up for their rights. rights.
And we call upon the men to support the women
Yes.
in justice. In conclusion, the Universal Periodic Review mechanism serves as a rare occasion for the Ugandan government to reflect on its advancement of women's rights as well as gender equality and its obligations under the international laws available as assessed by peers and members of the UN and also members of the human rights defenders here in Uganda. You do have the Uganda Women's Network that has given us its views on the matter, as well as the other civil society actors as have been called upon by Sharon. Now, these might include the right to live free from violence and discrimination, to enjoy the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, to be educated, to own property, to vote, to earn an equal wage, etc., etc. The Council will no doubt hand down a new set of recommendations in the coming times, but this time round, Ugandan government must take the concrete steps to implementing the recommendations, and if it is to finally address the deeply entrenching human rights concerns and fulfill its international commitments, not just to the international community, but to us here as Ugandans and women in Uganda. This program was brought to you by the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders here in Uganda, UPR 22, with support from the Irish Embassy and the Uganda Women's Network. I am Priscilla Regina Naluga. Good afternoon.